Former President Trump going after the Supreme Court and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell in a blistering statement. As to the border crisis, at least 3 people killed and more than 24 hospitalized Sunday after a suspected human smuggling boat capsized and broke apart just off the San Diego coast. This comes as White House Chief of Staff says rise in illegal immigration is not President Biden's fault. With Biden's massive spending proposals, fears of inflation are rising, but there are mixed messages. And what about the plan to raise the global minimum tax? Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Lots happened over the weekend, but first, former President Trump issued a statement going after the Supreme Court today. Trump kicked off the statement by saying the Supreme Court lacked the courage to do the right thing regarding the 2020 election, which Trump claims was stolen. Top GOP Liz Cheney pushed back, saying the 2020 presidential election was not stolen. Anyone who claims it was is spreading the big lie, turning their back on the rule of law and poisoning our democratic system. Trump then went on to say now there is a very good chance they, as in the Supreme Court, will be diluted and moved throughout the court system so that they can see how the lower courts work. With many new justices added to the court, far more than has been reported. Trump added there is also a good chance that they will be term limited, as in court packing. He went on to say our politically correct Supreme Court will get what they deserve, an unconstitutionally elected group of radical left Democrats who are destroying our country. Trump also went after Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, saying with leaders like Mitch McConnell, they are helpless to fight. He didn't fight for the presidency, and he won't fight for the court. Trump said in the Monday statement, if and when this happens, I hope the justices remember the day they didn't have courage to do what they should have done for America. Trump also said when he was president, his case wasn't heard in the highest court based on no standing. This week, an oversight board for Facebook is expected to rule on whether to allow Trump back on the social media platform. That's after Facebook and a slew of other social media platforms all suspended then-President Trump following the January 6th Capitol breach. Now let's turn to the border. A suspected human smuggling boat capsized off the coast of San Diego Sunday, leaving 3 dead and dozens injured. Officials said the group was overcrowded on a 40-foot cabin cruiser that's larger than the typical open-top wooden boats, often used by smugglers to bring people illegally into the U.S. from Mexico. U.S. Customs and Border Protection Supervisory Agent Jeff Stevenson said during a news conference on Sunday, every indication from our perspective is that this was a smuggling vessel to smuggle migrants into the United States illegally. The boat captain has been taken into custody and will likely face criminal charges. Border Patrol says in a press release that they have seen a dramatic increase in the number of maritime smuggling attempts recently. Border officials intercepted a vessel on Thursday near the same location. 21 people were on board, 15 men and 6 women. Agents determined all were Mexican citizens with no legal status to enter the U.S. Border Patrol said on Friday law enforcement officials would ramp up operations to disrupt smuggling off the coast of San Diego and warn potential border crossers of the dangers of trying to illegally enter the U.S. at sea. And over in Texas, Governor Greg Abbott suggested some of the illegal immigrants could be spies from China and Iran. He told Fox News host Maria Bartiromo about the border crisis, saying, we need to debunk if there's anybody out there who thinks that these are still just people coming from Mexico or Central America, coming here to engage in agriculture, something like that. They are forgetting about the people from China, from Iran, from terrorist-based nations. He added it could be espionage. Abbott went on to blame Biden for the border crisis, saying the current administration, quote, is doing nothing to stop the surge at the southern border. White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, meanwhile, said Sunday Biden is not responsible for the surge. He said on Face the Nation, people who are sending their children here unaccompanied, children as young as 6, 7 years old, coming here with no adult, who are sent on a dangerous journey, I don't think that is because of a speech Joe Biden gave. He adds that he thinks the reason is, quote, because of horrible conditions in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. Klain went on to say, we are working hard to get those children reunited with family members here in the U.S. He adds that the number of children we have stuck in our Border Patrol stations are down 84% in the past month. We are making progress on resolving this problem. Republicans have blamed Biden for the surge in recent months, saying his rhetoric and his executive orders to rescind Trump-era immigration policies are the reason behind the recent rise in illegal crossers. Nearly 5,000 children are in Border Patrol custody, and more than 13,000 children are currently in custody with Health and Human Services. And during the month of March, Border Patrol apprehended 172,000 illegal aliens, according to statistics released on April 8th by Customs and Border Protection. And an additional 1,000 per day are evading capture. In February, border agents apprehended 101,000 people. And the Pentagon has canceled the military-funded U.S.-Mexico border wall construction efforts. According to a Pentagon statement, quote, the Department of Defense is proceeding with canceling all border construction projects paid for with funds originally intended for other military missions and functions, such as schools for military children, overseas military construction projects in partner nations, and the National Guard and Reserve Equipment account. Those military funds will now be used for deferred military construction projects. Now, let's talk inflation. With all the talks of massive spending plans recently, fears of inflation are rising, but there's mixed messages. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said over the weekend Biden's massive spending plans won't cause inflation because they will be spread out over 10 years. She said on NBC's On Meet the Press she doesn't believe inflation will be an issue, adding if it does, quote, we have tools to address it. It's a stance shared by Fed Chairman Jay Powell, who's indicated he doesn't believe there will be inflation. Yellen went on to say Biden's plans are historic investments that we need to make our economy productive and fair. Economists like former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers have warned about inflation. Summers says inflation is likely given the Federal Reserve's current ultra-low interest rates, coupled with the Biden administration's proposed $4 trillion in new spending, and with Congress already approving about $5 trillion. While Yellen staunchly says there are no risks of inflation, White House Council of Economic Advisor Chair Cecilia Rouse gives a slightly different message. Speaking to Fox News over the weekend, Rouse says we expect at the most transitory inflation. That is what we expect coming out of a big recession. What does that mean? It means a brief or temporary period of inflation, but not persistent. Rouse also said at the moment there is no evidence to suggest runaway inflation. Now, while the Biden administration has unrolled the massive spending proposals, Congress still holds the ultimate power in enacting spending plans and tax changes. To pay for all these spending plans, the Biden administration wants to increase the corporate tax rate to 28%. The White House is facing a tough battle to convince Republicans and some Democrats to agree to the increases. Now, Senator Susan Collins signaled over the weekend she is not a fan of the tax hikes. Collins told CNN's State of the Union, I won't support American businesses paying the highest corporate tax rate among developed countries in the world once again, and unfortunately, that's what 28% would be. Adding, and that means that jobs would once again go overseas. Collins didn't say how far she would go in terms of compromise. She did show support for the $500 million counterproposal rolled out by Republicans. Collins told CNN, I think now that the Republicans have put forth a reasonable offer, it is up to the president to do a counteroffer to us. Collins went on to note the current proposal pushed by the White House numbers more than $4 trillion, adding that is the amount that we spent to win World War II. So this is an enormous package when you take both the traditional core infrastructure parts and the huge expansion of social programs that the president is advocating. Now, as to the fears that raising corporate taxes will send companies putting their money offshore, some are calling for raising the global minimum tax. White House Council of Economic Advisors Chair Cecilia Rouse also said over the weekend, the idea is to make sure that corporations are paying their fair share to button up some of the loopholes, which have meant more corporations were actually putting more money offshore and having a global minimum tax so that they're working with the rest of our trading partners, so that we are working with the rest of the world, so that corporations are paying their fair share worldwide. She adds President Biden is really saying, look, everybody should pay their fair share. This isn't the first time raising the global minimum tax has come up. Both Biden and Yellen have previously pushed for the adoption of a global minimum corporate tax rate. That's to reduce opportunities for tax rate arbitrage by American corporations that reduce their U.S. tax burden by shifting profits to low-rate tax havens. Biden said at a White House press briefing in the beginning of the month, "I've also proposed a global minimum tax, which is being proposed around the world for U.S. corporations of 21%. Adding it means that companies aren't going to be able to hide their income in places like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda in tax havens. This comes after Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen also urged the adoption of such a tax, which would rely on negotiating a 21% global minimum corporate tax rate with major economies. Biden's 8-year infrastructure plan is to be fully paid for by tax increases on companies spread over 15 years. His proposal is to boost the federal corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%. The Biden administration is seeking international cooperation on the global corporate minimum tax rate in an effort to at least partially offset any disadvantages that might arise from the administration's proposal to raise the U.S. corporate tax rate. The move is seen as a key to funding the Biden administration's $2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal. Both France and Germany, which have relatively high corporate tax rates in the OECD, welcomed the Biden administration's proposal. But Ireland voiced concerns about a global minimum tax. That country has chosen a low tax model to attract foreign investment. The country has one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the OECD at 12.5%. According to the Tax Foundation, increasing the corporate tax rate to 28% would raise the U.S. federal-state combined tax rate to 32.34%. This change will make the U.S. corporate tax rate the highest in the OECD, reducing U.S. competitiveness. The average corporate tax rate among the OECD countries, excluding the United States, is 23.4%. Tax Foundation said in a report, contrary to the proposal's claims about a race to the bottom on corporate tax rates, reductions in corporate rates have plateaued for more than a decade. Biden and the Democrats will need to convince at least 10 Republicans in the Senate to pass their infrastructure bill. They could also push it through without bipartisan support by once again turning to budget reconciliation, which is how the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill was passed. But in that case, they'd have to convince all Democrats to get on board. And Senator Joe Manchin has already indicated he is against such a big tax hike, saying he might consider it if it was raised to 25% instead of 28%. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and see you soon.